affair got hurt badly after he tried to confront my husband for kicking me out of the house. Not even in my worst nightmares did I ever see myself sitting in an ambulance and escorting my AP to the hospital after my husband almost broke all his bones. My name is Elise, and I have been married to my husband Ben for 5 years now. We live in Detroit, Michigan. Despite 5 years of marriage, I never imagined my husband was as violent as he showed me he was 2 weeks ago. I'm even scared of going to beg him because I do not want to face him. Honestly, things weren't always this sour in our marriage. Our marriage started out great and respectful, but not all good things last forever. Ben and I have been the best of friends for years, and we've been through very tough times together, but with time, the sour taste became visible. We have 2 children together, a boy and a girl, and presently, they do not live with either of us. Things got so ugly that our parents suggested that the children do not stay with either of us. Ben is so angry that his parents don't want our kids to see him that way. As for me, I'm not in the right emotional state to see my kids. So after having my second child 2 years ago, Ben and I started having serious issues. We argued a lot constantly about many things. The genesis of our arguments started with me getting insecure about his job. I hated seeing him going to work knowing fully well that he had got colleagues. I know how childish that sounds, but it's the truth. His female colleagues are pretty and smart. I hated the fact that I couldn't pursue the same career goals as they did. I'm just a housewife with barely any college degree. So I felt like he had to stop working and stay home with me to raise the kids. It's immature to say that, I know, but I didn't want him to quit his job entirely. I just wanted him to take a leave to make me feel better. But Ben claimed that he needed to earn money to provide for our kids and the house, and that taking a leave wasn't necessary. After the intervention of his father, we settled things and stopped having arguments. Things were back to normal and arguments subsided, but that victory was only short-lived. Eventually, the devil decided to test my loyalty to my husband, and I failed woefully. 1 year ago, I traveled to Alabama for my best friend's wedding. The distance from Detroit to Alabama is almost 14 hours by plane. That's literally a day's journey. Ben didn't like the idea of his wife leaving her 2 toddlers behind and traveling all the way to Alabama for a 1-week wedding trip. He insisted that I would only be allowed to go if I at least took my 1-year-old with me. I refused to do as he said and insisted that he took care of her himself. It just made no sense to me that he couldn't take up that responsibility for just a week when I had done the same thing for years. I left for Alabama without letting him know, and I left our kids behind. I'm not a bad mother, I just noticed a break. Besides, I didn't get why it was a big deal for him to just inconvenience himself for a week. He told me he had to go to work and couldn't take kids with him, but I didn't care. Being a housewife isn't a joke either way. I also have to make sacrifices, so I figured he had to do the same. The wedding in Alabama was the biggest test of my marriage life. I was a married woman in a different environment, 14 hours away from my husband, left with my own thoughts and conscience. What could go wrong, right? Everything went wrong. I am no saint, and I accepted that the moment I saw the men in Alabama. There were young bachelors who were ready to mingle whether you were single or not. Of course, I knew I had a husband, but the temptation was too much for just one person to resist. There was a cocktail party 3 nights before the wedding that made me lose my morals. A guy named Nick offered to be my date for the night. For the record, I did try to deny him the chance, but he was persistent and I got attracted to his persistence. I knew being close to Nick would bring trouble, but the trouble he brought was covered up in his sexy stare and attractive body. Nick was a big temptation that I didn't end up overcoming. He had a charming smile and seductive personality, and he never ceased to cross the line and touch me inappropriately. I can't put all the blame on Nick, though, because I was also leading him on and testing the waters. I told him I was single and hid my wedding ring in my bag. I even went as far as removing the picture of Ben and my kids that I had as my home screensaver. I wanted to come off as a single woman. That's how bad I fell for him. I didn't even want him to know I have kids. Many might think what I did is shameful, and I agree, but not everyone is able to resist the forbidden apple that is being dangled in their face continuously. I lacked self-control with Nick, and I didn't even put effort in resisting him. Nick is smart, and he played his cards well. He saw how excited I got when he was near, and he used that to his advantage. For me, it wasn't just lust. It was the fact that I saw someone new in a relationship that was fresh without any history or misunderstanding. It was something different from being married with kids and responsibilities. I finally got to understand why Ben badly wanted me to take the kids with me. My kids would have reminded me of my responsibilities as a mother and wife. But with them nowhere to be found, it was easy to forget that I was married with children. No one knew of me there except my best friend and her husband. She was too busy with her wedding to notice that I was about to commit adultery. Nick loved to play dangerous games, and I didn't stop him. He would whisper nonsense into my ear and I would giggle like a fool. Before the end of the cocktail party, I had kissed Nick over 3 times. I knew Nick would invite me to his room and I wasn't wrong. I agreed without hesitation and went into his room. Even till this day, I would always acknowledge the fact that Nick has a sweet mouth. He has a way with words that can confuse a person and just make you do things you wouldn't usually do. Right now, I hate Nick because it's his fault I have unlocked my husband's worst side. But that's a story for later. That night, Nick and I hit talking and he said a lot of sweet things to me. He went as far as calling me the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. Normally, I'm not one to get swayed by such words, but on that particular day, there was just nothing I could do. Nick completely brainwashed me and I shamelessly fell for it. From talking, we started making out, and just like that, I lost my self-control and ended up sleeping with him. The next morning, I shamelessly had a bath with him and ate breakfast in his room. As a matter of fact, I did everything with him that day and even skipped my best friend's brunch with us as the bridesmaids. I was too smitten with Nick to even go to brunch. I didn't want the wedding to end because I knew I would have to go back to reality and face my husband and children. I knew I would feel guilty, but that didn't stop me from sleeping with Nick all through the remaining days of the trip. I even moved from my hotel room into his because I felt it would be easier to access him that way. I became a full wife to a man I'd barely met for a week. On the lady day of the wedding and trip, Nick promised me he would be coming to see me in Detroit once in a while. He lived in Alabama, but told me he was also from Detroit and had family there. Though the idea of seeing him again felt nice, I didn't want to see him again because I knew I wouldn't be able to control myself. I was sane enough to know I couldn't act the same way with him like I did in Alabama. I didn't want to air my dirty laundry and expose my cheating habit. I also didn't want Nick to find out I was married with children. It became my dirty little secret to keep my AP and my husband away from each other and never let them meet. But obviously, karma has never liked me because they did meet and it ended in broken bones. But before the fight happened, there was backstory, of course. So now I'll let you know how my husband went from not knowing I was cheating to beating Nick up. It takes a blind person not to notice a shift in their spouse's aura and movements. Ben is definitely not blind, and after returning from Alabama, he watched me like a hawk watched a chick. In life, I have come to understand that the people who have more to hide are usually the ones that try their best to act and appear normal. That's the same thing that happened to me. I tried too hard to act like everything was fine, and that's how I gave Ben something to suspect. It was hard for me because that was the first time since I got married that I cheated on Ben. In fact, it was the first time since my relationship with anybody, including my exes, that I had cheated. I'd always been loyal to my last relationships that didn't even lead to marriage. So after cheating in my marriage, it was almost impossible to breathe in the same room with my husband. Nick is not a simp that you can manipulate and soften up. Nick is a man with a lot of confidence and intuition. First of all, he held a grudge with me. The fact that I left for Alabama without taking our daughter like he suggested, and that I also left before he woke up, was a big deal to him. He felt like I had disrespected him in some kind of way. When I got back, it was a lot to take in because Nick wasn't having it. He confronted me about leaving the way I did, and I decided to act defensive. I didn't want him to know he was right and that I had disrespected him and our marriage in the worst way possible. Nick refused to believe whatever I had to say, and he claimed that I had something to hide. According to him, the way I left was just too suspicious, and that sneaking away like that only meant I had other intentions. I knew I would rather chew a jean jacket than actually admit that I cheated on him or even had intentions of cheating on him. I decided to gaslight him and then act nonchalant after that. I just couldn't tell him the truth because I knew that he would kick me out without waiting for an explanation. I knew Nick would never forgive me if he found out I cheated. He has zero tolerance for adultery and infidelity. These are things we already spoke about before getting married, so I knew I would not be able to get away with it no matter what I said. That's why I decided to just play it cool and hope he'll forget all about it. I resumed my duties in due time and resumed being a housewife. My relationship with Ben was still rocky because I could tell he still had his suspicions. But I tried my best not to take things too far and just give it time. After some weeks, we felt like we were back to how we used to be. I forgot all about Nick and resumed my normal life. But that was only the calm before the storm. 4 months after the Alabama episode, Nick contacted me again and told me he was in Detroit. Yes, he actually told me that. To say that I was shocked would have to be an understatement. I didn't expect to ever see him again, so you have to imagine how I felt when he told me that. I just didn't know how to take that piece of information. Though it was a mix of feelings, Seven definitely knew that not a single part of me felt excited. There was nothing to be excited about because I knew Nick was trouble and he might end up getting us exposed. I wasn't wrong because not long after learning that he was in Detroit, he started asking to see me. One day he was so persistent that I actually agreed to see him finally. I knew he wasn't going to give up, so it was better to meet him. A part of me also wanted to see him again, even though I knew it was a very bad idea. So we met up for lunch, and just as I suspected, Nick was in trouble. This man barely wore any clothes to lunch, and he was touching me the entire time. Unlike how calm I was when he did the same thing in Alabama, I was extremely scared when he did it in Detroit. I mean, for crying out loud, we were literally in the same city with my husband. I had to be careful with the things I did because it was risky. But I also had to act normal or else Nick would suspect something. I have to admit that was the most awkward lunch I've ever had in my entire life. I had to keep my eyes open and look around just to make sure no one I knew was looking at us. But that man called Nick was too impatient, and he didn't care that we were in a public place. After lunch, I had to rush back home to make dinner for Ben. I also had to go pick the kids from school, so it was hard to meet up for lunch. Even though I rushed, I wasn't able to get things done on time, and Ben can't go back home. From the moment he stepped into the task, he asked me if I had gone out. I was very surprised at his question because I didn't tell him I was going out that day, so I didn't know how he was able to find that out. He angrily asked me why I left the children at school for nearly an hour before picking them up. That's how I got bursted, guys. I wasn't able to pick the kids up on time because I went to get groceries for dinner. I knew the teachers were going to call one of us, but I never imagined they would straight up call Ben without calling me first. When I didn't get a call, I thought they never called anyone. So I was actually surprised when Ben confronted me with all those questions. I was able to get out of that conversation by blaming the grocery store for being too slow with processing my payment. It was a very lame excuse, but I helped Ben shut up a little bit. My mistake was underestimating Ben's intelligence and thinking that everything ended with his questions. I had no idea that he would pursue the truth and get the answers he was looking for. Just like a devil, Nick invited me out a second time, and this time it was to dinner. I tried my best to say no because I didn't want to get caught. But Nick was as persistent as he always was and refused to take no for an answer. I had to be careful because going out in the night without getting noticed was almost impossible. It took me a lot of time to muster up the courage to actually go out on that particular night. I had to wait for the kids to fall asleep and then wait for Ben. Ben usually slept early because he had to wake up early for work, so it wasn't hard to wait for him. After he dozed off, I ran out to go meet Nick. Nick decided to lodge a hotel this time for the both of us. I knew I couldn't sleep over at the hotel, and I told him that, but he begged me to stay. Whenever I met Nick, it was almost like I lost all my brain cells and several of reasoning. I started acting irrational and doing the most stupid things. That's exactly what happened on that particular night. I carelessly had dinner with him, flirted with him, and kissed him many times in public. I think I let my guard down that night because I felt no one I knew would be out late. It also gave me peace of mind to know that Ben had fallen asleep. I slept in the hotel with Nick and then went back home the next morning. When I got back, I almost fainted at the sight that welcomed me. What I saw was every woman's nightmare. No woman wants to see her boxes outside of her marital home. It's a horrific sight, but that's the sight that met me. My heart started pounding in my chest because for someone who had left her boyfriend's hotel room, seeing her things outside her marital room was scary, yet I had to brace up and go in. The moment I got into the house, I was met with his parents in the living room along with my parents. It all came as a shock to me because I couldn't understand what was going on. When I questioned him, he showed me the video of me kissing Nick in the hotel restaurant the night before. I was left speechless with nothing to say up until the time our parents spoke in our presence about where to keep the children. It all happened so fast, and soon enough my mother pulled me by the hair and dragged me out of the house. Even while my parents were scolding me and telling me how disappointed they were, I couldn't say anything because I couldn't believe I had been caught after being so careful. Apparently, Ben actually followed me when he noticed I left the house. It didn't help that he had questioned my movements before. The next day, I called Nick and told him the truth about my marriage and my husband kicking me outside of the house. I'll stop here for now. I have to charge my device and go with my parents to Big Ben. I'll make an update soon. Update. Hi guys, I'll continue from where I stopped now. So Nick actually got very angry when he heard what Ben had done. He was upset I didn't tell him about being married, but according to him, it didn't matter because he was also in a relationship. I asked him if I could come stay with him in Alabama, and he refused. He told me he wants to confront Ben instead and get answers from him. I knew it was a bad idea immediately, but it ended up being the worst idea of my life. I was so shocked that he didn't change his mind. He made me take him to Ben's house. After knocking tirelessly, Ben opened the door. When he saw me with Nick, he instantly realized what the visit was about. Nick tried acting like an alpha by raising his voice and asking Ben why he threw me out of the house. "How dare you send the mother of your kids outside of your house like that?" he asked Ben. I even cringed at his words because I knew how weird the whole situation was. Ben tried to close the door in our faces, but Nick held it out and said, "I'm asking you a question." The next thing I saw was Ben grabbing Nick's shoulder and kicking him straight into the stomach before grabbing his hands and punching him in the face. It all happened so fast that if not for the loud wailing and flinching sounds Nick was making, I wouldn't have understood what happened. Ben kept kicking and punching Nick even though Nick was struggling and fighting back. It was obvious that Ben's anger was more than Nick's power. I didn't intervene until I saw blood gushing out of Nick's knee. I had to run in between them and try to defuse the situation, but that only ended me up on the floor. Ben didn't care. He just pushed me off. I had to run out of the fence to call a man to stop Ben. Nick was so injured that he couldn't walk to stand properly, so I had to call an ambulance. I couldn't believe that I escorted my AP to the hospital in an ambulance after my husband beat him up. Nick getting beat up was bad, but obviously he had it coming. He wanted to save himself the responsibility of taking care of me. But I still got in public and pushed to the ground. The worst part is that Nick made me pay his medical bill and blamed me for his injuries. He even went as far as blocking my phone number in front of me and telling me never to contact him again. He claimed that I was after his life and set him up with my husband. He blackmailed me into paying his bills or he would file charges on me and my husband. I had to pay the bills because I didn't want any drama. Do you guys remember in the last update I said I was going to beg Ben with my parents, right? It didn't end well. Ben has filed for divorce and he's not ready to forgive me. I'm getting a divorce, guys. He even told my parents about the move I made to bring my AP to his house. I didn't tell my parents about it before, so that didn't help my case at all. They were so disappointed that they asked me to move out. I used all my savings to pay for Nick's medical bill, so I'm broke. To make matters worse, Nick has ghosted me. I can't even walk with my head up high because people saw me running around the day Ben beat the hell out of Nick. I'm living in shame and barely any money, and now I'm going through a divorce and custody battle. All these have taken a toll on me, and I'm beyond exhausted. Ben left no stone unturned, and he has refused to give me any child support because he's asking for full custody of our children. He's trying to prove in court that I have abandoned them in school to go on dates, and I've also abandoned them for a week just for a wedding. I can see him winning this battle with his qualified lawyers. Hasn't he done enough for me? All these are taking a toll on me mentally, emotionally, and financially. I'm basically doomed.